Welcome to Faith for the Apocalypse. My name is Nick, and this channel is a space for us to talk about faith, politics, and whatever else we want. We are currently in kind of the hectic throes of Holy Week, but I thought it was important that we kind of stop and take a moment and really intentionally reflect on Jesus's crucifixion and what this occurrence, this violence at the hands of the state really means. And I'm not talking about what it means on kind of this interpersonal level with our own soul and salvation and our eternal life, but what the crucifixion meant for Jesus, for his community, and for Mark's contemporaries who are hearing this gospel story. It is really important for us as contemporary listeners to place ourselves within the historical context of the story so we understand what the words say, not just kind of to me personally as an individual, but what they say within the context of the time within which they were written. So let's talk a little bit about crucifixion and what it meant all the way back then. Now, crucifixion is a vital part of the Roman political theater of terror that we talked about in our Showdown with Power video when we talked about Palm Sunday. The act of crucifixion is a brutal public act that is meant to terrify and control the populace and to prevent any kind of continuing of the problematic activities, behaviors, thoughts, or words of those who were crucified. Crucifixion is a state execution that is practiced and approved of by the forces of empire. Now, as a kind of contemporary American reader or audience member, it can kind of be hard for me to get a grasp on what these kind of public executions mean and the role they had in their society. It's been about 100 years since the United States moved our state executions behind closed doors and to the middle of the night. We don't live in a context where kind of watching other people be murdered is supposed to get us to behave and do what we're told. I always found it kind of funny growing up as people would kind of wear, beautiful cross necklaces or earrings. But if we wanted to be kind of more accurate to understand the contemporary equivalence of the cross, we wouldn't have a cross. I might be having earrings of electric chairs or even lynching trees, if we remember our quotes from James Cone that we talked about in February. Now, crucifixion is not the only form of death at the hands of the Roman state, but it is a particularly brutal one that is reserved for particular criminals. And there are different kind of levels of terrible in crucifixion. And Jesus was given the very worst one. Some people who were crucified would be tied to the cross and left to suffocate slowly. Others would be tied and have kind of some kind of metal or debris that was piercing their skin in some ways. The most brutal kind of crucifixion, which was also the most rare, was to have metal spikes that looked like railroad spikes that were nailed through your wrists to hold you up to the cross. Jesus died quickly, but that's not what the state meant to happen. This death is meant to be slow, it's meant to be public, and it's meant to terrify anyone who might consider following. Now, why did Jesus get this sentence of such a brutal and intentional death that's making this public message? It's because of Jesus's ministry. The empire of Rome is dependent upon continual military conquest and expansion. We need resources. We go to a new place. We take over the land. We dominate the people. We have their economic bounty. Our economy is able to continue, and then our military is able to go out and commit conquest somewhere else. Jesus's message of nonviolence, of peace, of community, of solidarity, of equality, and of care is a direct threat to the empire. The crowds that have gathered, the individuals who celebrated as he entered the city of Jerusalem, are a threat to the state's very existence, and thus something must be done. Jesus was not killed because he was God. Jesus was killed because he said, the people around me are more important than the priorities of our systems of power. In Roman territories, the system is everything, and at the very top of the system sits the emperor, a leader who is in a fragile and precarious position, who could lose this position of authority at any time if enough chaos happens. To this insecure leader who lives so far away, an individual who talks about the way of peace is a threat. Someone who talks about overturning or flouting the very values that our empire is based upon, they need to die. Jesus was executed at the hands of the state by a means that was reserved for the very worst criminals, those who committed crimes against the empire itself. This brutal crucifixion was reserved for those who were guilty of treason and sedition. Jesus's radical and revolutionary message could not be allowed to continue. And yet, within all of this, Jesus is not powerless. Rather, Jesus kind of willingly gives himself over to the hands of the state for the punishment that he knows is coming. And Mark does some really cool literary work to help us understand. Just like back in Palm Sunday, when Jesus's procession turned the expectations of the military leaders of his time on its head, so does his procession towards death include an inversion of Roman ceremonies that celebrate militarism. The greatest honor that a Roman citizen could have bestowed upon them would be to be the individual of honor in the Roman triumph procession. These would be huge military processions that would take place after an area was conquered, after conquest had happened. There would be a great kind of military procession with a person of honor. There would be a huge bull that would be taken through the town and then ultimately sacrificed in the temple for Jupiter. And this Roman triumph, this march of glory, is turned on its head as Jesus marches towards his death. We can see this in kind of a side-by-side comparison with Roman tradition if we look at Mark's Gospel, chapters 15, verses 16 through 27. At the beginning of this kind of Roman triumph, a general or an emperor would begin gathering individuals together in a courtyard before leading the procession out to travel through the public. In Mark 15:16, we are told that the soldiers lead Jesus into the courtyard of the palace, and they called together a whole cohort to also prepare for their own procession. Next, in the Roman triumph, the triumphator, the person who is being celebrated, would be clad in a ceremonial celebratory purple robe and would have a crown of laurels put onto their head. After Jesus is arrested and brought to the palace, he is also clothed in a purple cloak, and thorns are twisted together to create laurels for his head. In the Roman triumph, as the procession is moving through the crowd would honor the procession by sharing their commitment to their empire and their leader by screaming, "Hail Caesar!" In the case of Jesus, we are told that the crowds began saluting him and screaming out, yelling out, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Now, that Roman triumph, remember, has a sacrificial bull, which is dressed and led along the triumphator who is being celebrated. But walking alongside that bull is also the Roman official carrying a huge double bladed axe, this instrument of death that is going to be responsible for the sacrifice that is coming. Jesus, too, is carrying his own instrument of death, which he is not able to carry the whole way. So a passerby is compelled to take up the cross and walk alongside the sacrifice. Now, the kind of supreme moment, the culmination of the triumph is this moment of sacrifice of the bull. But right before the bull is sacrificed, the triumphator, the person being celebrated, is offered a cup of wine, which he is required to refuse and place on the altar. This might be sounding familiar. As Jesus was hanging on the cross, he was offered wine mixed with myrrh, and he would not take it. And then he was crucified. We're told that the inscription of the charge against him read King of the Jews and was posted above the cross. During the Roman triumph, officers would carry placards, and those placards would depict the kind of conquest that we are celebrating or honor the individuals who we are celebrating, and would be carried on poles alongside the procession. And finally, Mark tells us in chapter 15, verse 27, that Jesus was crucified with two bandits, one on his right and one on his left. In the great triumph, the emperor would also always have one individual on his right or one on his left, individuals who were officials or key family figures. These were positions of honor that were always filled. In every moment of his ministry, Jesus turned the values and the messaging of the oppressive state on its head in order to portray a message of service, of suffering service, of a willing to deny ourselves, our wants, and our interests in order to care for the community around us. We are living under our own empire. We are living in a system that is dependent on economic conquest, a system that cannot continue because it was broken from the start. And some days we are the crowd calling for Barabbas. Some days we reject our responsibility towards peace in order to try to soothe our own anger and hunger for violence. We can challenge our state. We can make things difficult for those around us, but it's important that we also remain focused on love, on community, on service, and solidarity. May our anger at the situation not become hate for individuals, but rather be motivation to continue our struggle for the freedom and liberation, not of some, but of all people. Because, friends, that is what God has asked us to do. Thank you for being here today. If you like this content, if you like what I'm doing, please like, comment, subscribe. But more importantly, please share this channel with other people in your life who are people of faith, who might be seeking some more resources to figure out how we navigate kind of our current chaotic political situation. I know I'm finding myself really disappointed with the ways our religious institutions are responding. So my hope is this channel can give pastors and lay people the tools they need to really think about what's going on in our world from a biblical and theological perspective. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I will be posting another video next Monday called Resurrection People as we reflect on the role of the resurrection in our everyday lives. I am beginning to plan our summer series. So if there are any topics that you would like for us to cover on this channel, please let us know in the comments and we will add it to our schedule. Thank you so much for being here. I will be praying that you have a joyful and peaceful Easter weekend, and I hope to see you soon.